Hi, I'm Katelyn Phillips, and this is the Side Comment. For this episode, Archie Brown, author of The Human Factor, examines how the unexpected triangle formed by Mikhail Gorbachev, Margaret Thatcher, and Ronald Reagan contributed to the end of the Cold War.
I'm Archie Brown, Emeritus Professor of Politics at the University of Oxford. My book, The Human Factor, Gorbachev, Reagan and Thatcher, and the End of the Cold War, examines the significance of the interrelationship of these three leaders and how it contributed to ending the standoff which threatened the future of all humanity. When Mikhail Gorbachev became Soviet leader in March 1985, it was 6 years since a Russian top leader had last met an American president. Yet Ronald Reagan and Gorbachev held summit meetings every year between 1985 and 1988. This conservative Republican and the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union made an odd couple. Add Margaret Thatcher and you have an unexpected triangle. Yet this triangular relationship played a surprisingly important part in the ending of the Cold War. The three of them were never together in the same room at the same time, but Thatcher became a significant intermediary. In the words of her foreign policy advisor, Sir Percy Craddock, she acted as a conduit from Gorbachev to Reagan, selling him in Washington as a man to do business with, and operating as an agent of influence in both directions. Thatcher and Reagan first met in London in 1975, when the newly elected leader of the Conservative Party was not yet Prime Minister, and Reagan was still Governor of California. They immediately hit it off, agreeing on economic issues, and in believing that their governments had been too soft in standing up to communism and the Soviet Union in particular. They were both in favor of military build-up and intensifying the ideological struggle with Moscow. They shared a belief that the Soviet Union was intent on world domination. In 1983, the Cold War got dangerously colder. In March, Reagan made a speech to American evangelicals in which he described the Soviet Union as an evil empire. In the same month, he announced a new twist to his arms build-up, the intention to develop comprehensive anti-missile defense, a vastly expensive program of improbable practicality, but which was interpreted in Moscow as the US seeking a first-strike capability against the Soviet Union. Before the end of 1983, as tensions rose, both Reagan and Thatcher, while retaining their deep suspicion of Soviet motives, were persuaded that engagement with the Soviet leadership was desirable. But the aging Soviet oligarchy could not provide a negotiating partner. Three top leaders died within 2.5 years: Leonid Brezhnev in November 1982, Yuri Andropov in February 1984, and Konstantin Chernenko in March 1985. It was only with the arrival in the Kremlin of Chernenko's successor, the 54-year-old Gorbachev, that engagement became a practical possibility. Margaret Thatcher's place in the triangle is surprising, given the vast gulf between British power and that of the two military superpowers, the US and the Soviet Union. How was it possible? The main reason is that she was far and away Reagan's favourite foreign leader, and the one to whom he was most ready to listen. He called her a soulmate. That in itself made her important for a Soviet leader. But it went beyond that. Among conservative leaders worldwide, it was Thatcher who formed the closest relationship also with Gorbachev. In June 1984, an invitation was sent to Gorbachev to visit the UK. He was not yet Soviet leader, but he looked the likeliest next General Secretary. He arrived along with his wife Raisa and an accompanying delegation in December 1984, 3 months before he became top man in the Kremlin. The week-long visit was highly successful. In 5 hours of discussion, Thatcher and Gorbachev argued vigorously, but her visitor impressed the Prime Minister by his ability to disagree without resorting to Soviet dogma, by his intellectual acumen, and sense of humour. The Prime Minister famously said, "I like Mr. Gorbachev, we can do business together." In that same month, she flew to Washington and at a Camp David meeting reported to Reagan and his senior advisers on her favourable impressions of Gorbachev. Radical reform of the Soviet political system and the transformation of Soviet foreign policy were very much on Gorbachev's initiative. But ending the Cold War required active Western cooperation, especially from the United States. Reagan, by 1988, was ready to pay his first ever visit to Moscow. After strolling amicably with Gorbachev on Red Square, he was asked by a reporter if he still thought the Soviet Union was an evil empire. In an answer that reverberated around the world, the president replied, "No, I was talking about another time, another era." With his hardline credentials, Reagan was able to get approval for arms reduction agreements that would have been a harder sell in Washington for a liberal Republican, not to speak of a liberal Democrat. Margaret Thatcher, for her part, had more meetings with an American president and more with a Soviet leader than had any other prime minister in British history. She was a divisive figure in British politics, with her domestic policies polarising public opinion. But in backing to the hilt Gorbachev's reforms, meeting regularly and separately both with him and with Reagan, and assuring each of these principal protagonists of the good faith of the other, she played a constructive role in the ending of the Cold War. In that endeavour, the Prime Minister was in tune with a broad swathe of British public opinion. How far Thatcher had moved from automatic suspicion of every Soviet leader was illustrated in September 1988, when in conversation with Roderick Braithwaite, the diplomat who was about to become British ambassador to Moscow, she spoke about leaders in other countries and about the forthcoming American presidential election between George Bush the Elder and Michael Dukakis. In terminology scarcely imaginable from the Iron Lady, as the Soviet Army newspaper had called her in the 1970s, Margaret Thatcher said, "If Dukakis wins, Gorbachev will be my only friend left."